shows with Carson, but let me tell you a story a lot of people don't know. When Jack Parr, Steve Allen had the Tonight Show before Carson came in. Remember, Steve Allen was on years
Correct.
ago, and Steve Allen left the Tonight Show and went to L.A. and had a late night show that a lot of college students watched and what have you. I was traveling already, but I watched him, but I never met him. And Carson took over, and Steve Allen heard about me. I wasn't known nationally then. I was known in New York and New Jersey, and he heard about me. He said, "Let's fly this gentleman out to L.A. I want him to appear on the show." Now, here's this true story. The show's going to start. Steve Allen says, we're all interested in ESP. We're all interested in the power of the mind. This gentleman has an unusual gift. This young man, would you welcome Kreskin? Now, he did not use the term amazing because Carson gave me that years later, and I had not met Carson. Johnny Carson would go home. He would always tape the show in the daytime, and whether it was in New York or when he moved to L.A. And he went home to his where he was living in New York City. He was sitting with his wife, and he sees that Steve Allen is going to have a mentalist on, so he's watching the show. Now, the show starts. I'm in L.A. Never did a national show before, and of course I know it all. Sure, I know it all. I'll tell you how little I know. Steve Allen is at the other end of the stage at a dais. It's slightly elevated, like all his talk shows are. And I'm walking towards Steve Allen. He's at the other end of the stage, but I'm looking at the camera, which is in front of me. And there's bright lights around the camera because in the 1960s, the lighting was very hot in television. So I'm looking at the camera. Now, let's face it, if I had any more sense, I wouldn't keep looking towards it because the lights were blinding me. And as I get closer to him, I trip over the dais and fall flat on my face. And Steve Allen was not a mocking type person. I love him, man. He bends down. The first time I met him, he says, "Young man, are you okay?" And I was fine. And he had me stand up. I got about a half hour of the show. Johnny Carson was watching the show that night and saw the incident when I tripped over the desk. And 7 or 8 weeks later, created a character on a show called Karnak the Magnificent. And when Karnak came on with his turban, he always fell over the desk. The last show I did with Johnny, years later, because I've gone so many times, I said to him, "Johnny, thank you for, even when I'm not on, you don't let your audience forget me." He says, "Oh, the mighty Karnak." He modeled Karnak after me falling over the desk.
Wow. I don't
know about that story.
I've never heard that story myself. That's such a fantastic story. You know, the other story that I like to hear, the one story that you tell about when you did Catalapsy with Johnny Carson. I love that story.
Well, that was a very interesting thing. Understand this, that Carson had a rule that he never met. He met them before in the past, and another years. But the day of a show, if you came on his show, he did not meet you before the show. You did not come into his office or anything else because he wanted to be fresh when he saw you. And by the way, that got in the news about 2 or 3 months ago, and they did reveal that even though people didn't realize that Carson never met his guests before a show, he had 2 exceptions of people coming to his dressing room, and the exceptions were Orson Welles, and the other person was yours truly, Kreskin. So I decided, the show called me and says, "What are you going to do on this coming show?" And I told them, and they said, "Okay, Kreskin." Now I get a call about 4 or 5 days later. I said, I haven't been back on the show. I'm doing the show for every month, what have you. So I get a call, and it's not from Carson's people. It's from NBC. It's one of the heads of NBC. And they said, "This is Kreskin." I said, "Yes, sir. I'm on with Johnny next week." They said, "Yes, you are. You told the staff you were going to do such as..." I said, "Yes." They says, "No, you're not to do it. Listen to us, you're not to do it." Well, you don't argue with NBC or the Pope or anybody else. So I said, okay. So that's the way it's going. Now, about the weekend before I'm going to do the show, maybe Thursday or Friday, I get a call from Johnny's secretary. She says, "Kreskin, Johnny wants to talk to you. Can he call you tonight?" I said, "I'm at a university here out in the Midwest." I said, "I'll be back in the hotel at 10 o'clock. He says, "That's fine because it's 3 hours. It's a time time difference, all that jazz. He'll get a hold of you. So I'm in my hotel room. There's a telephone call from Carson, and he says, Kreskin, you're going to be on with me next Monday or Tuesday. I said, yeah. He says, NBC told you not to do this. I said, yes, I understand. He said, he had some words to describe NBC, Bill, that are four-letter words that are only in certain dictionaries.
Wow.
He said what he thought of NBC. He says, they can go to hell. He says, we're going to do it. Now, Johnny knows I had to see him before the show. I don't see it, but I needed to program his mind. So now, before I get to the station, I'm in my dressing room. His secretary comes to my door, and she says, Kreskin, you're going to see Johnny. I said, yes. And we're walking towards his office, and she's not acting right. She doesn't seem comfortable. I said, you okay? She says, yes. I see, and then finally I said, well, is something the matter? She says, Kreskin, we don't understand. Johnny doesn't see people before a show. I said, but he knows I need to see him. She says, I understand. It's just that he's had such a strong rule. Now I go into his room. He's sitting at a small table with a bare light bulb over because he's looking over his monologue. His monologue was everything to him. And I had him stand up. I said, Johnny, I want you to trust what I'm going to do with you. You're not going to be hurt. And I started counting, his eyes closed, and I described something was going to happen to him. Then I counted to 5 and opened his eyes. He says, Kreskin, I touch you. I trust you, so forth. Now the show, we're on the air. I'm the final guest, and I'm sitting next to him. And he says, Kreskin, you have something special you're going to do now. I said, yeah, Johnny, we should come over and walk over here. Now, we did not go through this before the show because I'd been traveling. I just programmed him mentally. He's standing there. I said, Ed, would you come over, stand by him? Doc Severs, would you come over, stand on this side? Would you folks get 2 chairs? And they didn't know what was going on because there was no rehearsal, no description, anything. I start counting. Johnny's eyes start to close. And I said, Ed, when Johnny starts to fall, catch him. He says, are you kidding? Of course I will. So Johnny starts to sway back. Ed catches him. I said, Doc, lift him up. He's now stretched rigid. There's a chair at his feet where his head is. Put the chair under his head and shoulders. And there he's stretched between 2 chairs. And there's no trickery. There's no illusion. He's stretched between 2 chairs. Nothing in the middle of him. I motioned to Bette Midler, who's a guest on the show. Would you come over? He says, no. She says, no, Kreskin. I said, I'd like you to come over. She says, no. And by the way, weeks later, I had dinner with her in New York. She says, I was scared out of my wits. So finally, one of the producers says, and Ed McMahon says, come over here, Deb. She comes over, and I said, I want you to sit on the middle of him. And she looks at me like I'm insane. I said, please sit. We'll be praising. And she sat and lifted her legs up. And nothing under the middle of him. That picture, by the way, was in the centerfold of Parade magazine a month or so later. It was all over the world because it was so dramatic. Now we finally lift her off. I stand Carson up, and I start counting 5 back to when his eyes open, and he's now able to relax. And he says, Kreskin, I would have sworn it was a baby you put on me. And that was Bette Midler. And by the way, every once in a while, he would give a look towards a couple of men sitting off to the side of the groups that were the guests on the show. They are not on the show, but they were men, and he'd give them a dirty look. They were members of NBC, and he wanted to get back at them.
Who was all the guests on that show that day?
Well, I can't even tell it right now. I can't because it's so legendary that Bette Midler was the key because she was terrified. She was sitting on him, and she said when I had dinner with her a few month or 2 later in New York, she said I was terrified. And then when you told me to lift my legs up, and I'm sitting on the center, she said I was afraid I was going to break his back. But it shows you, Bill. It shows you how powerful the mind can be. And